We're receiving new, potentially pivotal developments in the investigation into the mysterious disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. If you've been following this story, subscribe now and turn on every notification, because what experts have begun saying over the past 48 hours is something none of us ever wanted to hear. It's the question that, in every long-running missing person case, investigators eventually have no choice but to confront. A question families often beg journalists not to ask, and one the public conversation has largely avoided saying out loud, until now. The question is this: is Nancy Guthrie still alive? This is no longer a cold theory or a provocative speculation. According to investigators, forensic specialists, and former agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, it has now become a difficult but necessary reality that must be examined as the investigation moves forward. In the past 48 hours, several developments have quietly shifted the direction of the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, and with them, the difficult question that now shapes every decision moving forward. Search efforts have reportedly paused the use of cadaver dogs, while a medical specialist familiar with Nancy's condition warned she may have been at serious risk of a fatal heart attack at the very moment she was taken. At the same time, the operational command linked to the Federal Bureau of Investigation has moved from Tucson to Phoenix, a change investigators rarely make without reason. Even more troubling, law enforcement sources say specialized signal-sniffing equipment was deployed in desert areas near the border, not necessarily to locate a living victim, but to search for any trace that could reveal what truly happened. In a moment of raw honesty, Savannah Guthrie publicly admitted that the possibility her mother may already be gone can no longer be ignored. Tonight, we confront the question many have avoided. Not speculation, but the hard reality investigators must face. What do the evidence, the medical experts, and the science actually suggest? To understand that, we have to return to the moment when this investigation quietly changed tone, when what began as an urgent rescue operation slowly started to look like something far more uncertain. In the early days of the search for Nancy Guthrie, the operation looked like a full-scale rescue mission. Hundreds of agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation were deployed, a 24-hour command post operated in Tucson, and cadaver dogs combed through the desert terrain. Helicopters circled the Catalina foothills, using signal detectors in hopes of catching even the faintest Bluetooth ping from Nancy's pacemaker. Everything about those first weeks carried the urgency of a race to find someone alive. But then, the momentum quietly changed. Many federal agents based in Tucson were reassigned, and the command center was relocated to Phoenix. The large, highly visible search effort that once dominated the investigation gradually shrank into a smaller, more concentrated task force, signaling a shift in strategy. When reporters later questioned Chris Nanos about the cadaver dogs that had once been a constant presence but were no longer seen, his response was measured. He said the dogs remain available if needed in the future. Careful wording, because that is not the kind of language investigators typically use when they believe a living person will be found soon. Then Chris Nanos said something that instantly captured national attention. When asked directly whether Nancy Guthrie might still be alive, his answer was cautious: anything is possible. Not a confident reassurance, not a statement that evidence points to her survival, just that brief, uncertain phrase. It stood in stark contrast to his earlier remarks weeks before, when he openly said he believed Nancy was still out there. For many observers, those 3 words signaled a dramatic shift in tone. Around the same time, John Miller addressed the case in a detailed retrospective. Miller isn't known for speculation. His background includes senior leadership roles within the New York City Police Department, where he once oversaw intelligence and counterterrorism. His perspective carries weight in law enforcement circles. When discussing Nancy's fate, Miller framed the issue with striking clarity. He explained that the question of whether a victim is still alive changes everything in an investigation. If there is even a chance the person is alive, urgency drives every decision, because investigators know a life may still be hanging in the balance, and every hour matters. According to John Miller, the direction of any investigation changes dramatically depending on one critical factor: whether the victim is believed to be alive. In cases where a person is presumed dead, investigators often slow the pace, not out of defeat, but to become more careful and methodical, following complex leads that require time and precision. Importantly, Miller never declared that Nancy Guthrie was dead. Instead, He explained the investigative logic shaping the decisions being made right now. If there is strong belief a victim is alive, the response becomes urgent and relentless. Every available resource is deployed immediately. But if investigators begin to suspect the victim may not have survived, the strategy changes. The work becomes more patient, more forensic, and focused on building evidence strong enough to hold up in court. The current posture of the case, the shift from hundreds of agents to a smaller task force and a growing emphasis on intelligence analysis, appears consistent with that second approach. It does not necessarily mean investigators have given up. Rather, it may indicate they have recalibrated the mission. Perhaps the most emotional signal of this possibility came from Savannah Guthrie herself, who shared a deeply personal message online acknowledging the painful uncertainty surrounding her mother's fate. In a deeply emotional message, Savannah Guthrie publicly acknowledged a possibility no child ever wants to face about a missing parent. Speaking about Nancy Guthrie, she admitted that her mother may already be gone, adding that if she is in heaven with loved ones who have passed, the family will try to accept that reality, though they still desperately want answers. It was a moment that felt less like surrender and more like a daughter preparing herself for the unimaginable. Former Andrew McCabe later explained what a statement like that can reveal about the conversations happening privately. According to him, the Guthrie family's public messages throughout the case have likely been shaped with guidance from specialists within the Federal Bureau of Investigation, including crisis negotiators and hostage recovery experts who carefully help families choose their words. If Savannah's acknowledgement was part of that carefully guided communication, it could suggest investigators are quietly preparing the family for a different reality, a step authorities rarely take unless their assessment of the situation has shifted. And when medical experts examine what may have happened on February 1st, they say the question of Nancy's survival isn't only emotional. It's a matter of human physiology, and some of those medical conclusions are deeply concerning. Sleep specialist Pat Byrne recently discussed the circumstances surrounding Nancy Guthrie on a segment with Nancy Grace. He focused on what investigators believe may have happened in the early hours of the night, around 2 a.m., when Nancy was allegedly awakened suddenly and taken from her home. According to Byrne, a condition known as sleep inertia can leave a person severely disoriented when they are abruptly pulled from deep sleep or REM sleep. In that state, especially in the middle of the night, an elderly person may experience extreme confusion and physical stress. Byrne pointed out that research shows older adults, even those without heart conditions, can face a heightened risk of heart attacks when violently awakened from deep sleep. But Nancy's situation may have been even more fragile. At 84 years old, she was living with a pacemaker, a device implanted because her heart cannot always regulate its rhythm on its own. Byrne explained that the combination of sudden awakening, the disorientation of sleep inertia, and the trauma of a forced abduction could place someone in her condition at serious risk of a fatal cardiac event almost immediately after being taken. Medical experts say the danger may not have been something that developed over days or weeks. It could have occurred within minutes. Sorrier actor Naidu, a board-certified cardiologist and professor at New York Medical College, explained that pacemakers are commonly implanted in elderly patients suffering from bradycardia, a condition where the heart beats too slowly to sustain normal circulation without electronic support. For someone of Nancy Guthrie's age, Dr. Naidu noted that a sudden physical shock, such as a violent confrontation or forced removal, can trigger severe cardiac stress. The body reacts instantly. Adrenaline surges, blood pressure spikes, and the heart is pushed into rapid overdrive. A younger, healthier heart might absorb that surge. But in an 84-year-old pacemaker patient, the heart often lacks the same physiological reserve to withstand such trauma. In other words, the risk isn't theoretical, it can be immediate and life-threatening. Adding to the concern, another critical detail from the scene drew the attention of forensic experts. Traces of blood reportedly found on Nancy's front porch. That evidence prompted analysis from renowned forensic pathologist Michael Baden, who examined what that small but troubling detail might reveal about what happened in those first chaotic moments. Forensic analysis later confirmed that the blood discovered on the porch belonged to Nancy Guthrie through DNA testing. According to renowned forensic pathologist Michael Baden, the pattern of the blood carried an important detail. It wasn't a smear or streak from a moving wound. It appeared as distinct drops with pale centers, a pattern often seen when blood is expelled from the nose or mouth and mixed with air. That distinction matters. Dr. Baden explained that such droplets are commonly linked to facial trauma, such as a blow to the face or a forward fall onto a hard surface. In this scenario, the evidence suggests that Nancy, an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker, may have already been injured, bleeding from the face, before she even left the property. Another troubling detail deepens the concern. Nancy's medication was reportedly left behind inside the home. While often mentioned as a sign of urgency in the search, medically it may carry even greater significance. Because Nancy relied on daily heart medication, missing those doses could dramatically affect her chances of survival if she was taken without them. Another critical detail in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie was confirmed by Chris Nanos. The medication she depends on for her heart condition was left behind inside her home. When investigators entered the house, the drugs were still sitting on the kitchen counter or in the medicine cabinet. They did not go with her. For an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker, that detail carries serious implications. Doctors have avoided giving an exact timeline because they do not know Nancy's precise prescription schedule. Still, the medical consensus for elderly patients relying on essential cardiac medication is troubling. Missing even one dose can destabilize the delicate rhythm those drugs are designed to regulate. Missing several doses, especially while under extreme physical stress, can rapidly shift survival expectations from a matter of weeks to potentially only days. Then investigators introduced a tool that hinted at what they were truly searching for. Journalist Ashley Banfield reported that authorities deployed a specialized Bluetooth signal detection device, often called a signal sniffer, across desert terrain in Santa Cruz County near Rio Rico. The device was meant to detect the signal from Nancy's pacemaker. But according to law enforcement sources, investigators were not necessarily expecting it to guide them to a living person in a home or vehicle. Instead, they feared it might lead them to something far more devastating, a body somewhere in the desert. The reports about the search strategy in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie are not rumors. They come from law enforcement sources speaking to journalist Ashley Banfield, who cited contacts closely connected to federal investigators. Earlier in the case, cadaver dogs were deployed, and later authorities used specialized signal detection equipment in remote desert terrain. Taken together, the technology used, the area searched, and the tone of those reports, the effort has at times appeared closer to a recovery mission than a traditional rescue. Yet the situation remains complex. Chris Nanos has not declared Nancy dead, nor has he publicly shifted the case into a homicide investigation. When pressed by reporters about whether she could still be alive, his response was strikingly direct. There is no proof that she isn't. For Nanos, that uncertainty leaves room for faith and hope. In legal terms, Nancy is still officially missing, not confirmed deceased, and that distinction matters deeply, for investigators, for the public, and especially for her family. Meanwhile, analysis from John Miller emphasizes that the case is far from cold. Evidence is still being processed, and multiple scientific tests have yet to return results, meaning the investigation is very much ongoing. According to John Miller, the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie is still very much active. Detectives continue to follow leads that have not yet been resolved. Miller noted that a case only truly becomes cold after a long period, often years, without progress. Right now, he describes the situation with a single word: opaque. Not closed, not abandoned, simply unclear. History also offers powerful reminders that hope can survive longer than expected. Elizabeth Smart was taken from her home in Salt Lake City in 2002 and held captive for 9 months before being found alive. Years earlier, J.C. Dugard was abducted in California at just 11 years old and survived 18 years in captivity before being rescued. In both cases, public hope had faded and investigative assumptions had shifted, yet both victims were ultimately recovered alive. In Nancy's case, investigators also have a factor that complicates the narrative: ransom demands. Several media outlets reportedly received messages requesting millions of dollars in Bitcoin. The communications included specific details about Nancy that had not been publicly released, among them information about the location of her Apple Watch, suggesting the sender may have had direct knowledge of the situation. If someone truly abducted Nancy Guthrie with the intention of demanding money, then keeping her alive would serve a clear purpose. A living hostage creates leverage, while a dead one eliminates it. Former Federal Bureau of Investigation hostage negotiator Rich Frankel has explained that investigators in cases like this often focus on one key signal: continued communication. As long as a kidnapper keeps responding, the possibility of negotiation and survival remains. The ransom messages tied to Nancy's case have not been fully verified, but they also haven't been dismissed as fake. That uncertainty keeps one possibility alive. If the messages are genuine, someone may still be holding Nancy as leverage. There is also an important medical clarification. Data from Nancy's pacemaker stopped transmitting around 2:28 a.m., but experts say that does not necessarily mean the device stopped working. The connection simply ended when the Bluetooth link between the pacemaker and her phone was broken by distance. The pacemaker itself continues operating independently inside the body, regulating the heartbeat whether or not it is connected to a phone or monitoring app. Even if Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home quickly, medical experts say her pacemaker would likely continue regulating her heartbeat. The signal that stopped at 2:28 a.m. most likely ended because the Bluetooth connection to her phone was lost, not because the device itself failed. The bigger concern is the medication she left behind. Doctors say missing essential heart medication can destabilize cardiac rhythm, especially for an 84-year-old patient, though the exact timeline of medical decline varies from person to person. In truth, no expert outside her treating physicians can say precisely how long she could survive. What specialists generally agree on is this: as time passes with no proof of life, no confirmed ransom contact, and no medical support, the probability of survival gradually decreases. Still, investigators from the Federal Bureau of Investigation continue analyzing DNA evidence and other forensic leads. For now, the case remains unresolved. Hope may be fading, but it has not disappeared. Investigators are still combing through digital evidence connected to the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Surveillance footage from January 11th is being compared with additional cameras across the neighborhood. Detectives believe that somewhere, on a doorbell camera, a server, or within cell tower records, one crucial piece of data may exist that finally answers the question haunting this case. Not only who took Nancy, but what happened after she was taken. Clinical psychologist Emily Mellon from Tucson Medical Center explained the emotional toll such cases take on families. In an interview, she said losing a loved one is always devastating, but when someone disappears without answers, the pain becomes even more complicated, because the uncertainty never allows the family to fully grieve or move forward. That emotional reality is something Savannah Guthrie has openly described while speaking with colleagues on the Today. In a deeply personal moment, she revealed how the endless questions surrounding her mother's fate create a kind of waiting that no family is ever prepared to endure. In a deeply personal moment, Savannah Guthrie shared a message that captured the emotional reality of the search for Nancy Guthrie. She said she is still standing, still hoping, even though she does not yet know what this experience will ultimately make of her. It was the voice of a daughter living with the hardest part of this case, not knowing. Meanwhile, investigators and experts continue to analyze the facts. Search tactics have shifted, specialized technology has been deployed, and the command structure of the Federal Bureau of Investigation has adjusted as the inquiry evolves. Yet despite all the effort, no body has been found and no proof of death has emerged. The case remains active. DNA evidence is still being processed, timelines are being re-examined, and forensic analysis continues. Until definitive evidence appears, the only honest answer to the central question remains the one expressed by Chris Nanos. There is still no proof that Nancy isn't alive. In cases like the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, sometimes hope is the only thing families have left, and sometimes that hope is enough to keep the search alive. Authorities continue to urge the public: if you know anything, no matter how small, contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately at 1-800-CALL-FBI. A reward of $1.2 million has been offered for information that could bring Nancy home or finally give her family the answers they deserve. This case is still unfolding, and investigators believe the breakthrough could come from one tip, one memory, or one overlooked detail. Stay informed and follow the updates, because when the truth about Nancy Guthrie finally comes to light, it will change everything.